She changed some things in her life that were really meaningful to her. And she walked it into Oprah and was like, we have to have this woman on the show. I had this meteoric rise. In 96, I was on the cover of Money magazine with a client who had gone from making $50K a year to $500,000 a year. My phone exploded. My business exploded. 3 publishers came to me. We live with these rules about you never go backwards, but it's not going backwards if you become happier.
Hi, everybody. This is Dan and Dante, and welcome to Middle-Aged Mess, the show where I just keep asking, how did I become the same age as all these old people? Today, we've got a real powerhouse guest. She is a life coach, a career strategist. She's written 5 or 6 books. She's done TED Talks. She's been on Oprah. Honestly, she's probably a little bit too cool for this podcast, so I'm really excited to have her on today. Laura Berman Fortgang, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I want you to talk a little bit about yourself, but I think it's going to make me feel bad about myself. So I'm not sure how much detail I want you to get into, but
I appreciate the honesty.
So give us a little background on what brought you here today and all the things you've been doing for the past, couple of years you've been around.
Yeah, I started out as an actor. So you as an LA person can relate to meeting a lot of those people, but I'm here as an East Coaster interested in being on Broadway. That's what I thought I was going to do in my life. I had to completely reinvent, didn't have a job out of college. So what was I going to do? And somehow I ran into this coaching world just as it was starting. And, all that gumption that you put into an acting career served me really well in a profession that no one had ever heard of. Now I've had the opportunity to do, all kinds of things I never dreamed of, but most importantly, helping other people reinvent themselves. So I love the name of your podcast.
Thank you.
I too wonder how the heck I'm looked at as old by some people. Like, what?
It's shocking to look in the mirror, isn't it? It's shocking because your brain doesn't recognize that you're, over 40 or 50 or 60, as the case may be, right?
Exactly. Your brain's like, who is that? That is my parent. That is not me. Yeah. So I love this whole mess and how do we get through it? And and I've approached it from the career satisfaction side for people.
Well, I'll tell you what, my son is a freshman at University of Michigan in their theater department. So he's going to be an actor too. So he'll be unemployed for the next 20 years or so. So I may be sending his resume to you. Just maybe you can.
I've got a daughter finishing up her senior year in musical theater at Ithaca. So I get it.
Okay. So maybe they'll both, sell real estate together. It'll be fantastic. But I almost don't know where to start with you. You've done so many things. Where do you start? Like when you're introducing yourself at a cocktail party, who are you?
I help people figure out what they want to do with their life. That's what I tell people.
Okay.
I don't even get into the author and the whole other bit. I help people figure it out without their resume. Like your resume is useless. Your resume just tells me what is the natural next step of the thing you've already been doing. I like to interest people in looking deeper and looking at their life story because there's reasons why you made decisions that aren't a match to who you are today. And a lot of reasons that's how you got into one line of work or another.
Well, let's talk about your story, because I think it's pretty interesting that you started as an actress and you wanted to be on the great white way, as they say, and it's not so easy. So I imagine you ran into an obstacle or two. But what happened to push you into coaching? And back when you did it, I don't know that coaching was a thing yet. I mean, you were one of the first.
It was not a thing yet. Well, here I was. Look, my parents wouldn't let me be a theater major. So that's part of why I've let my kid be a theater major, because I had to make up for that, right? So they wouldn't let me. They were not going to spend money on that. So I was a communications major with all the other frustrated actors, right?
Right.
We put ourselves in our films. We put ourselves in our TV shows. When it came to graduation, I had less fear about moving to New York and trying for my dream than I did about getting a job. I was more afraid to get a job.
Yeah.
And end up being 35 and now I can't change my life because I've got a mortgage and kids and everything else. So I had to give it a shot. I did reasonably well. I got my union status. I worked in decent theater. I did okay. I just didn't like the lifestyle.
Yeah.
So unpredictable. I mean, now I work for myself, which is still unpredictable, but it's not as unpredictable and out of your control the way acting is. It's so out of your control. Like you could be seriously talented and still not succeed.
You're right. I am from LA. I've lived here my whole life. And so I've had a lot of friends and family and people in the entertainment industry. I was a lawyer for a long time. So I kind of, delved into some of the contracts. And I even wrote a couple books long time ago, got a little bit of press on that and got into the entertainment industry for a few months and was just within 6 months, I wanted to kill myself. I mean, it's a devastating industry. It's just brutal for you. Emotionally, it's hard to deal with. You have, like you said, no control. I tried to warn my kid away from it, but naturally he didn't care. Whatever I said, he just did the opposite. What was the thing that happened, the
Yeah.
transition from the acting into the coaching?
All right, here's where it gets juicy. I literally hit a major depression. Spent 8 years out of college. I don't have a resume to get a job. I was miserable because I worked really hard and it wasn't working the way I wanted it to. My parents were really worried about me. I mean, they like took me to I'm trying to find a nice word, to the mental health facility to see if I should be checked in. And,
Just
they
because you
wanted to
wanted to
check
be,
me in.
just because you wanted to be an actress? That was the only reason? Or did,
No. I mean, no.
okay.
Yeah, I was so depressed and unable to function that my parents, were very worried about my future of living on the planet. And they wanted to check me in. And I ran away from the facility. I was like, if I do this, I'm forever going to be this sick person, right? And labeled, I felt in my own mind. So I found my way back by myself. And along the way, and this is the woo woo kind of part of the story, I had an intuitive sense that I needed to call an old mentor of mine. And it just kept repeating, call Jay, call Jay, call Jay. So finally, I look him up way before the internet, found him and said, I didn't want to tell him I had voices in my head telling me to call him, but the voice was like, he has your next career or job for you. And I told him I wanted to leave show business. I didn't know what else I would do. And he goes, well, I'm a coach and I can help you figure it out. So I was a client for 2 years.
What
And
what year was that?
1990. By 96, coaching had exploded, and I was in it by 1991. I became a student in 1991. So I was with him for like a year or 2 years, and I started teaching presentation skills, because like actors know how to stand and give a talk and whatever.
Right.
And I started doing that. And then I realized I wanted to do something, more with it. And so the first coaching school in the US was taking off at that time. I was student number 16. We were the same 16 people that started the International Coaching Federation, which is the only body that exists to put ethics and standards and testing and certification in place. And the rest was just this meteoric rise. I mean, I had this meteoric rise. In 96, I was on the cover of Money magazine with a client who had gone from making 50K a year to 500,000 a year. And my phone exploded, my business exploded. 3 publishers came to me, and it was just unbelievable.
Can we talk about coaching? So I don't know if it's more in California or Los Angeles. I get inundated with coaches all the time.
It's everywhere.
Right. But you talked about putting ethics and standards and guidelines in there. And I don't think most coaches have any sense of doing the right thing. They're just, if you pay me, I'll tell you what you want to hear and send a check, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's still anyone can put up a shingle, and we've tried so hard to make this a profession that has ethics and standards, and it doesn't have board certification like a doctor or a plastic surgeon, but we do have levels of certification. Like you can be an ACC, a PCC, or MCC. I'm an MCC, which is a master credentialed coach. And what is coaching? It's really not advice giving, even though that's what most people think it is. Most people think it's like, you pay me, I'll tell you what to do. It's really a technology, a methodology of helping people hear themselves, right? So different than therapy in the sense that therapy is about healing the past so that you can function in the present. And coaching is about taking what's right in your present and leveraging that to create a future. It does attract a lot of ex-therapists because it's a more health-based discipline than looking at the problem is. And it's not telling people what to do. I've worked tens of thousands of hours. So obviously there's advice that can come into it because I've seen a lot of things. But if I'm doing my job, I'm asking more questions than giving answers and trying to peel away the layers of what someone's trying to say and get them to the truth. So where I was telling you that I had to listen to my own intuition to find my way in my life, I think a lot of people have a sixth sense that they're trying to get in touch with, but they don't trust it because of how we are programmed, the way society is, oh, how can you walk away from a big job and join the circus, So
Yeah.
we just don't trust that as a society. So I think that coaches have become a mentor for people that help them help themselves.
So you started by doing presentations. How did your practice expand? What are your specialties and what are you primarily coaching people on?
In the beginning, it was, whatever you wanted to do. You wanted to get from A to B, I could help you get there. But my sweet spot became helping people reinvent their careers, really figure out what they want to do with their life. And then because I help so many people start businesses, I also have a specialty with working with service business owners on how to create their own brand, their own methodology, their online presence, and getting themselves out there. So it kind of became one was an outcome of the other. But I've even worked in corporations, executive coaching, executive presence.
And who's the typical person who's calling you? Is it a businessman who's struggling? Is it somebody who's doing well but wants to break out even further? Who's the guy or girl who's calling you up?
Both men and women who have been unhappy for a while, but they kind of look like they have it all. So it's really hard to reconcile. Look, I have this great job, or I have a family and a decent job, and why am I unhappy? Is there something wrong with me?
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of imposter syndrome out there, right? There are people who are doing well but don't know why, or don't think they belong, or don't think they fit in, or just don't know why they're doing what they're doing, even though they might live in a nice house, right?
Right. And there's a lot of people who, if we talk about the theme of your show and, whatever middle age is, we worry about our relevance, our longevity. Most people are going to have to work for a long time. So is there a second, third, fourth, fifth career, that they should be thinking about? Because once you get too expensive in your 50s for companies, you're quite, you're quite vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. Managers and high level executives seem to kind of go by the wayside pretty easily. But also, I find, and a lot of people I interview on the show really talk about things changing. They've been doing a certain thing, raising a family. They had a certain profession for 40, 50 years. And then you kind of have a tendency to wake up at this, I'm 55, and I kind of wake up and look around and go like, is this what I want to do? Is this where I want to be? But you're so used to it. You're so in the groove of who you've been. It's really hard to figure out a way to go to a different direction. And I imagine that's what you get a lot.
You're talking to one of the points that I always make is that we get an identity crisis, and then we can't see ourselves as anything else. Imagine your identity is like a fragile egg, right? So the egg shell is the salary, the perks, what people think of you, how proud your mom is of you, the nice house, and then what's inside is what we can reinvent. We can't reinvent the shell because that stays put unless we break it.
Yeah, I think also in America, like we're such a capitalist society. We're so based on, money and resources and what do you have and what do you own? And for people to leave at the age of 40 or 50, their job that they've had for decades, probably going to take a hit in salary. They're probably going to make less money. And to do what you want to do versus what you've been doing, it takes a lot more than just saying, I'm ready to go. You have to, like you say, deal with all of those things that you're not going to be the person you were the day before you left that job.
Well, you make a great point because we also have like an unwritten rule that you never take less money. It always has to be more money.
Yep.
And yet I've seen more and more people take less money, even temporarily, to make a shift because you will eventually get the next raise and progress in the new career too. But yeah, we live with these rules about you never go backwards, but it's not going backwards if you become happier.
Right. And so what's your process? Okay, so I've just called you, Laura, I'm 55. I want to start a podcast. I want to do my thing. I'm tired of being a lawyer, tired of being a senior housing owner. I'm tired of my son being in acting. What do we do? How do we start?
We start with a list of 25 things that you can't stand. That's exactly where we
Is that
start.
true? Is that
Yep.
what it is?
Yep. Because the things that you can't stand are clouding up your vision. So we look at everything that's bugging you and what things can be sort of taken off the list. What can we turn into something that you want? Because everything you don't like or don't want is showing you what you do want, right? So I no longer want to be a lawyer. What do you want? I want my podcast. I don't want to support my kid to be an actor. So what do you want? I want to know my kids.
Kick him out of the house. Kick him out of the house,
I
right?
want to know by the way, I'll just say as an aside, acting training is great training for life.
Yeah.
Any bachelor's degree nowadays, unless it's in computer science, is useless. Anyway.
I said the same thing. If you're in liberal arts, forget about it. You're hosed anyway. So at least enjoy yourself during college.
Exactly. And the skills that he will build, forget the singing or whatever else it is, but like both my husband and I were actors, and every job we ever had for money, working at a call center, or I was a waitress forever, they always want to hire the actors as full-time employees because they're superior. They are multitaskers out the wazoo. They're smart. You can't be dumb and learn lines and know where to stand in 25 different places on a stage. So They're incredibly smart. They're incredibly nimble. They have good communication skills. They present themselves well. So your kid's going to land.
Well, I'll tell you what, my other kid, my daughter, who's the older one, she started taking improv classes when she was 7 years old.
Wow.
7 years old. She can walk into any room, onto any stage, any place, anytime without a care in the world. Just, it doesn't even affect her at all. And like you said, that's helped her in journalism. That's helped her in writing. That's helped her in school. That's helped her in everything she's done, you know? It's fantastic training for a future, regardless of what you do.
It's fantastic training. And not only that, but that confidence can't be bought. You know, that confidence, it's so hard to build it if you don't do it from an early age. So I think it's fantastic. And you know, I used to joke that, I mean, it's not a funny time to joke about Israel, but Israelis have to go to the military, and American kids should be trained as actors and waiters. They'll be much better human beings.
Yeah. I'm a dual U.S. Israeli citizen, so I'm
Are you
deep.
really?
Yes, I'm deep in that story. Yeah, we actually have a podcast called Four Israelis Talking, where we get four
Is
of
there
us.
time for anybody to talk if there's four Israelis?
There's a lot of arguing and screaming and throwing things, but somehow we get through the hour. What are the things you find for middle-agers? And right, we don't know what that is. I mean, I think that's like 50s now, maybe even 60s. I don't know what middle age is. It keeps going up a couple of years. But what's the thing that they're missing? What are the things that they most often come to you and need changes with?
Meaning. They want to do something more meaningful.
Right.
You know, whether they work for a company that makes widgets or something that just doesn't speak to them anymore. You know, if the money used to be enough, now it's like, I don't do anything that makes the world a better place. And you don't have to always change your job to do that. I find meaning to be one of the biggest things. And I can pinpoint that to the shift in my business. And I've been doing this since the early 90s. To 2001 and 9/11. My phone went dead for 4 days. And then after that, people were contacting me like crazy saying, anything can happen. The world can end tomorrow. I've got to take the back burner dream and put it on the front. I've got to do something more meaningful. And that trend has kept going ever since.
Let's say we are talking about a lawyer or a high achiever who's making $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 a year and more. And, you know, they want to go out and save the whales. How do you work through that with them? I mean, how does a person who's used to living, you know, driving the BMW and the house in Greenwich goes off and, you know, joins the Peace Corps? Does that happen?
That does happen. I won't say in multitudes, but that definitely happens. I've had people change their whole financial plan to change their life and sell the house and sell the Beamer. But most of the time it's looking at, okay, so if we get rid of the ego pieces, the car, the salary, you know, all those things that you're letting inform who you are, what's really crying out inside, right? So you want to save the whales. Can you do it with your money and stay where you are? Would that make you happy? Can you volunteer? Would that make you happy? Or do you need to bring your legal skills into a nonprofit and take whatever pay cut that's going to take for you to fight the good fight?
But getting rid of that ego component is really hard. I would think that would be the hardest thing. I mean, especially for guys, and I'm sure women who are obviously big breadwinners these days too, like you get some sense of satisfaction from your friends knowing that you drive this car and live in this house and take these vacations and your kids can go to these schools and all. At this age, is it easy? I mean, imagine it's really hard to get rid of that.
Hearing you, it's like, wow, that is really hard. But I've helped so many people work through it. It gets to a point for some people where it gets old. It's like, okay, it depends how strong your backbone is. It may mean your group of friends change if they don't really see you for more than your socioeconomic status. But there's plenty of people doing it. I mean,
Right.
we don't have to all go live in a tiny house, but there's a happy medium in there somewhere.
Got it. How has coaching changed for you over the years? I'm sure when you started in the early 90s, it was one thing because you were a trailblazer. I mean, you were kind of figuring it out as you were going along. And I imagine it changes as time goes on.
Well, it's changed because I mean the market is so saturated, and I don't even like to call myself a life coach because you've never seen a life coach portrayed well on television. You've only seen, you know, they're the goofy one, or you know, they're always bad people.
Yeah.
So I've stuck to career executive coach. So the biggest change I'd say is just, first of all, the internet is a big change. I had email in the early 90s. I was one of the first people to have email, but the internet has changed everything. It's changed how books sell. It's changed how We communicate. I built a business without the internet. Can you imagine?
I can't believe we even survived before the internet,
There
I,
you go.
I remember running around Europe, after I took the bar with, a map, a paper map, and like a train schedule. And I'm like, how the hell did I ever get any place? It was impossible, right?
I mean, how did we do without cell phones and Google Maps? How did we do that?
It's amazing.
But it's funny. I often compare that to like my dad died 7 years ago. He still had an atlas in the back pocket of his car. If people don't know what that is, it's a humongous, like bigger than 8.5 by 11 book that's maps of the country.
Every time I go to my parents' house, I go and check out the Encyclopedia Britannica that they have on the wall because it's just so fascinating,
That's how we did things. And, that to me, that's what we were given in high school and college to figure out what you want to do with your life. What do you like and what are you good at? And we need a much more fine-tuned GPS. And that's what's changed is like we need to know ourselves better. If you know who you are and what you want, the ego stuff is easier to part with.
And how do you find that? Is it as easy as just sitting down and talking to somebody and kind of ask them questions or?
I told you I don't look at people's resume. I have a process where I look at your life story and I look for certain themes in your story. I look for what are your drivers? What's motivated you your whole life? And I look for things that used to be dreams of yours, whether they came true or not. And these three lenses, so to speak, on your story have helped thousands of people at this point figure out something else to do with their life. And the most important one of those three really is what drives you. Because so many people make a vow, like even as a teen or in their early 20s, that they're not going to be like their dad, or they're never going to be poor, or they're going to do this, or they'll show that teacher who didn't believe in them. And they're successful for a long time, but they outgrow the need for that vow. And then they don't understand what their rudder is anymore. It's so unconscious. People don't even realize it. And helping them discover that has been mind blowing and releasing for people to recognize, wow, I'm not that person anymore. I don't need to do that anymore. I proved that.
Right. And I imagine you deal with a lot of empty nesters too. My kid just went off to college in Michigan, so I am now alone in my house, and I'm divorced too. So that really kind of gives you a punch in the gut, when your kids are gone, because you spend all this time raising your family and doing all these things to make sure they're okay, and then they're gone, and then like, who are you at that point?
And they owe us nothing. Like there's no contract that they
Right.
need to be there for us anymore.
Right.
We did our part. Yeah. So redefining, who you are, that's a critical point for a lot of people for sure.
How do you get to a person like, look, again, we could use me as an example. Like I've spent the last 20 years doing everything in my power to make as much money as possible so I can pay for the private school and make sure they're okay. And now they're gone. And is it a 1 week process? Is it a 6 month process? Are you with people for years?
That's a great question. I work with people for 3 to 4 months, and we get it figured out in 9 or 10 sessions. There's a little homework in between. The name of my book is Now What? 90 Days to New Life Direction. So anyone can get that. The whole process is in there. But it's really, figuring out what you can't stand anymore. What's the identity crisis that you're clinging to? What are some of the things that you tell yourself that you can or cannot accomplish? So we're going to overcome those limits. Looking at your story, trying to find a sense of purpose for you. Everyone has one. And then taking very practical steps to take all that navel gazing and turn it into action. Every week there's homework. Every week you're out taking action. If you want to do something that you've never done before, let's say you wanted to suddenly work in computers. I'd send you off to talk to 3 people who are doing that and find out what it's going to take and where you're going to start and how do you break in. And I find it amazing that when people start networking, some really interesting coincidences start happening. It's
I always say the harder I work, the luckier I get.
There you go. I can never predict what's going to happen with a client. It's sort of like, come take the journey with me. I don't know what to tell you. Most of the time, it works out that some coincidence or something they remembered or something they used to love to do suddenly becomes the thing that they're going to do. Let me give you an example. So I worked with this woman. She was a pretty high level executive in pharmaceuticals. And she took a package to retire. Like they were getting rid of people. And she's like, I'll take a package. I'll retire early. She had plenty of money. She moves to another state. She has a horse. She used to love race cars. She has a new love in her life. Like everything's going swimmingly. She's bored to tears. She's got to figure out what else to do with her life. So she calls me and she comes back every week. It's like, well, I applied for a job, but I don't really want it. I'm like, wait a minute. Why are you applying to jobs? Like she kept applying to pharmaceutical jobs. Like she missed it. She missed the accolades. She missed the prize, best women leader awards, whatever. And I was like, you got to stop. We can't figure out what's next if you keep looking in the back in the rear view mirror and missing the past. So she loves her horse. People work with horses for healing.
Oh, yeah. It's huge.
So she wanted to work with women who've been through a tough crisis or another with horses and help them overcome their stuff. She didn't have the courage to go and do that directly, but I sent her off to go meet with the stables around Florida in her area. And she ended up getting a position in the Equestrian Society in the state. And we haven't kept up since, but she found her way, and it wasn't exactly what she thought she was going to do, but it was a transition. And it was interesting how much she clung to like the past.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Also, I'm at the age now where a lot of my friends are starting to retire or semi-retire or thinking about retiring, or at least getting to the point where financially they could entertain the concept of retiring. And the conversation we have over and over again is, what do we do then?
Right.
Your now what book is great, because that's the question we ask each other all the time. Well, what do you do? If you don't have a job to go to, what do you do during the day? Do you get another job? But what job does that mean? Do you have a hobby? I mean, that's the terror of retiring is, what do I do? So Dr. Berman Fortgang, what do I do?
What do I do?
What do I do? Yeah.
All right. What would be meaningful for you?
I'm going to have a dopey podcast where I, just listen to myself talk.
Podcast serves people. How do you hope it serves people?
I'll tell you what I love to do. I personally love to put together puzzles. I love to put together all the pieces of something and make it work. So what I actually did, I'm doing a podcast because I do love listening to myself talk. I'm one of the few people. But what I also is I created all of like the picks and shovels around the podcast. That I have a studio and I have tech people like Billy and I have all the tools you need to make a great podcast. So I started to call my friends in and have them do podcasts. So I've created like essentially a podcast production company where the emphasis is not necessarily on me succeeding, but it's in me helping others succeed. And I get a lot of joy out of doing that.
And that's where meaning will come from for most people, is that they're doing something that serves other people or improves something or improves a condition of some kind. That's where meaning comes from. It's connection with other people. So, just the old idea of retirement, of that people are going to sit in their lawn chair and watch the kids go by on their way to school. I mean, that's just not how people want to retire. We have so much of our identity around work that we still are looking for something that's going to be useful. We want to be useful.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know that concept of retirement ever really existed, right? I mean, I think people died a lot earlier before, No,
I think they did die a lot earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I run senior housing. And so I hang out with people who are in their 80s and 90s and hundreds every single day, and they're even people who are living in my senior communities, they're trying to do what you're talking about. They're trying to find meaning and trying to find a purpose within the confines of our community. And that's another thing that we try and do is we try and give them things that will make them feel like they're still vibrant and viable and relevant. And that's another thing I find from people kind of my age who are transitioning to something else is it's the concept of relevance. People don't call you anymore. People don't want your opinion anymore. They're doing it on their own. And so even if you have money or you have a business, you have whatever, like you want to feel like you're doing something, like people still rely on you. And that's something that I've found that it's really difficult as you get to kind of our age.
It is. We have ageism in this country. Like we don't respect age in this country the way, let's say, the Japanese do or other cultures do. I mean, we just turn an eye like there's nothing you could possibly teach me. There's nothing you can say to me. And so, finding that relevance, whether it be among your own age group or always being curious and always learning and staying on top of what's going on, especially with electronics in our world. But you're totally right about its relevance, its meaning, its being valued and having something to contribute. Contribution is key. I mean, I watched it with both my parents. Like when they didn't have their work anymore, they just floundered.
Yep. My dad's 83 years old. He goes into the office every single day. Every single day. Yeah, he's great. He's got.
What does he do?
We don't really know anymore.
What did he used to do?
We had a construction and electronics business that he was running. The business has definitely shrunk a lot, but we still have some people dealing with, some real estate And so he goes in and look, he might watch some Israeli videos and he has a couple meetings and makes some calls. And I'll tell you what, he is the most hip 83-year-old I've ever seen. He has tons of friends. He has weekly meetings. And I think it's because he's doing that. Had he stopped coming to the office, had he decided to retire in the more traditional sense, I think he would have wasted, I don't think he would have lasted this long, you know?
I agree with you. I agree with you. I mean, you have to keep your brain engaged. You have to stay up to date. Um, I just think that when we lose that, we lose it.
Yeah. By the
Like
way,
if you don't use it, you lose it.
yeah. And I have him on Four Israelis Talking. He's always the star of the show. So it's fun. So I do want to talk a little bit about you, though. So there's a million life coaches out there, and not too many who've been on Oprah, not too many who've given TED Talks, and even fewer who've written 6 or 7 books, or however many you've done. So how did you become nationally known? How did you take your local practice and become so big or bigger?
Some of it was really right place at the right time at the burgeoning profession that this was. I didn't have a publicist when the books come out. The publisher has a publicist. Here's an example of like the chutzpah. All right. So chutzpah's guts.
Yes, I'm familiar. Yeah.
I know you're familiar. Explaining for your listeners.
No, absolutely.
The publicist that I had for my book that I got on Oprah with, she happened to know one of the producers. And she said to the producer, let Laura coach you for 3 months. No obligation. You need to know what this is like. You need to understand what this is. And so really no strings attached. I coached her for 3 months, she changed some things in her life that were really meaningful to her. And she walked it into Oprah and was like, we have to have this woman on the show. And I had 30 minutes of 40 minutes of airtime on that show.
Oh,
and
wow.
I only had 4 days notice to go on live, which was a shame because when you have more notice, the publisher can get those books out into the stores. But we still sold like 40 or 50,000 copies in 4 days.
While the show was going on, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And that was before you could go to Amazon and click, right? So it was within that week.
What'd you talk about with Oprah? What was the premise of the show?
The subject that I was on Oprah for was like, what can you give up? Like it was giving up something. And the first little part was her talking about having to give up swearing. They sent me out in the field to work with a woman who was just like miserable because she was so busy. She was a stay-at-home mom. And while that camera was rolling in her house, I could not get her to admit to any weaknesses or anything that was bothering her. She wanted to be all sunshiny and wonderful for the program. And we took a break and she didn't know that the camera was still rolling. And I got her to admit that if she didn't have this long to-do list, she'd feel like nobody needed her. And she broke down crying. And that, of course, that's what ended up being on the show, like that 30-second clip. And the irony was like, Oprah's like, wow, you got that so fast out of her. I wanted to laugh so hard. I was like, yeah, when she thought that camera was on, she was not going there. But
Yeah.
she went there and, it was like she had to give up this hero syndrome that I call it with women of having to do everything for everyone. But it's all based out of the fear that nobody will need you.
Right. And there is that ego too. I mean, she didn't want to show it to the world that she was possibly vulnerable, which I can understand.
Right, of course. And we, treated her with utmost respect with it. But she just, we got nothing until she thought the camera was off and we could speak truthfully. And that's how coaching works. Like you have to tell the truth. You can't sugarcoat it. We talked about perfectionism. And she followed me back to the dressing room and wrote down some of the quotes that I said in my book. And they were like, we're having you back. They teased me for 2 years and they never happened.
And she hasn't invited you to Montecito or anything? No brunches?
No, we haven't had a Super Soul Sunday or anything.
Okay. All right. What about the TED Talk? What was the TED Talk all about?
My TED Talk is called How Do You Find Your Dream Job Without Ever Looking at Your Resume? So that one's about those 3 lenses to look at your life story through. And I tell the story of this guy who he just couldn't figure out. He couldn't reconcile what he knew was next. Remember I talked about intuition?
Yeah.
He really wanted to do something with outdoor adventure and outdoor sports because he loved that, but he didn't have the guts to start it. He wanted to start like an adventure travel company. And I said, well, let's see how this matches your life story. And he goes, well, I've gotten every dream that I've ever had. So your theory doesn't work because I talk about dreams you didn't get and how they have significance for today. Right. So he wanted to be a magician as a kid. He wanted to be an architect. He wanted to be in advertising and do huge billboards in New York City. And he was really into adventure sports. And I said, well, all those things have in common. Like, think of when somebody's face sees a magic trick, right? You go, or when you look at architecture, you're like, wow. Or you go into the nature and you're like, wow. You inspire awe, sir.
Right.
He was like, whoa. And then talk about coincidence. Someone he knew needed a branding and advertising guy for his adventure travel company. Now, the funny part of the story is this guy freaked out, and I didn't hear from him for 10 years. He freaked out that we figured this out so clearly for him. Wouldn't answer my calls, couldn't find him for a decade. When we were putting out the 10th anniversary edition of my book in 2015, tried to contact him, couldn't find him. I wanted to check in with him. Then one day I get this email, like a catalog email of outdoor equipment for extreme sports. And I look at the bottom, like, why am I getting this? And it was his name. And I called the company. He picked up and he thought it was hysterical that he sent me this email. And he goes, I did it. I did it. I have an adventure travel company, but it's the equipment, not the trips. So it took 10 years for him to make that transition. He's my longest story. Most people are 2 to 3 years to make a transition.
That's awesome. And then the books you wrote, we've written, is it 6? 6 is the number?
Yeah, with 5 my major publishers and one that I wrote as a self-published. Yep, I have 6 books.
And what drove you to write books?
Somebody asked. No.
Okay, done, finished. We're over.
No, I wanted to write a book, but I didn't know how. I didn't know that you needed an agent. I didn't know that you have to sell your book. I didn't know any of that. I just had an idea for a book. And when that magazine article came out, 3 publishers called me. They're like, have you ever thought about writing a book? I was like, well, as a matter of fact, I have. And then I also, more luck, my dad knew a lawyer at the William Morris Agency, which is one of the biggest literary agencies.
Yep. Okay, where can people find you?
They can find me at my name. It's long, www.laurabermanfortgang.com or nowwhatcoaching.com.
Awesome.
And we'll have a free download for your guests.
Okay.
For your listeners.
Fantastic. Laura, thank you so much for coming out. You have a very, very interesting story. I'm glad we got a chance to know you. I might be calling you next week. I don't know. I need to figure out some meaning in my life.
I'm all about it. Thanks,
Awesome.
Dan.
Okay, thanks. Laura, appreciate it. All right, everybody, that's it. We got another Middle Age Mess episode in the can. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.